My name's Lewis, and on Friday the 3rd of May 2015, I got stabbed 4 times in Rushden. I was on a normal night out with about 5 friends, started at mine, had a barbecue, drinks, didn't think it was any different to usual. We went down to a local karaoke bar, again having a good time. Night was coming to an end, went outside, which is where things turned pear-shaped. We were outside, there was a girl I knew that her ex-boyfriend was giving her some abuse verbally and physically. My friend went over to cool things down, at which point the guy then started on him. I went over to get him off my friend, at which point he stabbed me 4 times, twice in my arm, once in my leg, which got my femoral artery, femoral nerve, and once in my stomach. It went through my femoral artery, femoral nerve, which obviously means I lost majority of my blood. Luckily there was a policeman out that night that was also very highly medical trained that managed to save my life. Not only that, I had friends that all come and help me. I had several paramedics have to stop blood, and I was within seconds of dying. To be stabbed, you don't know it's happened at the time. I thought I'd been punched, and it wasn't until, and I remember very little of the night because I lost so much blood, but it wasn't until I tried to push myself up off the floor and I physically couldn't. My leg just kept collapsing. I knew something was seriously wrong, and I looked down, and at that point I remember passing out. Next thing you know, I woke up. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, and that was at Northampton General Hospital. I got told I'd been stabbed, and I couldn't believe it. It wasn't until I then felt my leg, I realised that I couldn't move. I had things sticking out of me everywhere, things being pumped into me, and it wasn't then until I started realising how lucky I was to still be alive. Because it's something like this is never, I've seen things on the news, I've seen things in films, you never ever think it's going to happen to yourself, but it just, you suddenly realise that it does happen to anyone. It can happen at any time. I class myself as a normal person. I'd never ever carry around weapons, knives, never think I'd be involved in anything like it. Next thing you know, I'm waking in hospital, and I have been involved, and it was to me just mad that I could even think that I'd be classed in the same bracket as knife crime, but turns out I'm a victim. My first few days in hospital, I was in intensive care, where they first of all had to tie my artery, sort that out so it's back to being normal. They also had a go at my nerve graft in Northampton General. When I woke up, I realised that the stab wound in my leg was so severe that it was actually led to paralysis of my quad, which was to have then need a major operation to be able to turn around for any chance to have my leg back, or it would be paralysed for the rest of my life. It wasn't until I started to need to get up and shower that I realised how bad my leg was. First time I got wheelchaired to the shower, I thought I'd just stand up, normally get in the shower. I collapsed on the floor, and in hospitals they're very, very strong on their falls. They don't like it to happen. So then I had to have 2-3 people take me to shower whenever I needed to go, which was obviously not a nice situation to be in. Being in hospital in general is not nice, but to have a catheter fitted is not a nice experience, especially when you have it removed and then you can't go toilet and you have to have it refitted. Having to go for a poo in your bed is not a nice experience, but something that I was forced to do. To not be able to leave bed for weeks, you just don't ever get to feel your normal self. My wounds were so severe that they had to be cleaned daily. My stomach had to be opened up for the surgery as well to check that no vital organs were hit. So I had staples and stitches on my stomach. My leg had staples all in it, and my arm was lucky enough to just have a couple of stitches. Because I'd been stabbed in the groin, it had severed my main nerve, which effectively lets you move your leg. So without that, I couldn't move it at all. For any hope in getting my movement in my leg back, I needed to have this specialist operation, which would be to take a nerve out the back of my foot, so I permanently lose feeling in the back of my foot. The nerve graft was described to me as having one nerve being an end of a hair, the other end of the nerve is another part of hair, and you're putting a hair in between and fusing them together. The chances of it being successful were only 30%. If the operation wasn't to work, then I'd never be able to walk properly again. Because the procedure I had to go through was so complicated, I had to transfer in between hospitals. So I had my original stint at Northampton, but they weren't specialists enough to do the nerve graft. Then turned out I got a blood clot on my lung, which meant that I couldn't transfer hospitals, which again was life-threatening. So I had to go for a procedure which puts something in the middle of your main artery, so it takes any blood clots, so I can then have the procedure that will be able to give my leg back. When I eventually had my operation at Stanmore, I then got sent back to Northampton General, where I stayed for another 4 weeks and was completely bedbound. I couldn't move at all to have the best chance of the operation working. I had to lie flat on my back, lying in bed all day, left with nothing else to do but to think over the incident, and it played on my mind, brought me down, and was just not great for my mental health at all. Some could say it was the start of a downward spiral. After 6 weeks in hospital, I was told that I'd be allowed to go home. They provided me with a hospital bed, crutches, Zimmer frame, but I still had to stay bedbound until they told me that I'd be able to get out. A week after coming out of hospital, I actually fell over and had to go back to hospital for another week because I'd done damage to my leg from just trying to be normal. Having such bad injuries, I was very dependent on family, friends to keep me going. Not only when I was in hospital, I had to be washed, bathed, taken to the toilet, actually have to go toilet on the spot. For nurses, my mum actually helped, and when I eventually got home, my mum had to help shower me, dress me, and as a 22-year-old man, obviously that is not a situation you want to be in. It felt derogatory, embarrassing, but it's what had to be done because I couldn't physically do anything for myself at the time. Because I was bedbound for so long and I had no trigger to my quadricep, the muscle wasted away to literally nothing at all. So I had to have my leg in a cricket bat splint to start with so it wouldn't move at all. Then eventually I went into leg braces. After the operation in Stanmore, I just got told I needed to wait and results would take time. A year went on, I could see no progress at all, and I went for an appointment to see the guy that done the surgery. He said, sorry, we usually see signs by now. We might have to look into doing another operation, which obviously I broke down afterwards. I thought, I've lost my leg, I'm not going to be able to walk properly again. He booked me in for 6 months' time, and he said, at that appointment, we will decide whether we're going to reoperate. 6 months later, I went there. The day before, I felt my kneecap just twitch, and I thought, oh, this could be something. Went to my appointment, and he said, this is brilliant news, the nerve graft has worked, and now it's just going to take a lot of hard work to get some form of leg back. I couldn't believe a year and a half later was when I found out the results, but that is just how severe the injury was. And when the nerve graft eventually worked, it was like building up a baby's leg. Even to this day I still struggle, and at the time I couldn't lift my leg up at all. Now I can just about lift the trainer. Now it's 4 years on and I'm still not 100% or anywhere near. I still have at least one fall every 3 weeks, and visibly you can see in my legs that one's a lot larger than the other because I physically can't do as much on it as I used to be able to. Before the event I was very social, but afterwards I found myself where I couldn't go out and act like I used to before. Feel like when I was with my friends I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Felt like I couldn't be around the place I usually was because I didn't feel safe, and it was just a situation I'd never been in before. I was very active when it comes to sports, played loads of golf, got to the point where I went to a golf college, could have turned professional, could have had a scholarship in America, and then when I come out of hospital and tried to play again, I could barely hit the ball. I was embarrassed I'd lose to people that I knew I was better than, but I just physically couldn't play to the ability I could before. Squash was another thing. Even to this day I still haven't been able to run properly. Sports have just suffered massively. The day before I got stabbed, I just purchased myself a new BMW. I got to drive it once and then got told I might never be able to drive it again. It was heartbreaking to see it on my drive, not knowing if I'd ever be able to drive it. Lying in bed all day, not being able to move is extremely hard, especially when you can see people on social media leading the life of a normal 22-year-old, and I'm just stuck in bed watching DVDs. I wanted to be out, I wanted to be having fun, I wanted to be going on holiday, I actually had a holiday booked for the week after I got stabbed, which obviously I couldn't go to. Me and a friend were supposed to be going to Tenerife, and I couldn't go out to miss out, and I felt like I was missing out on things that really I should have been doing because this wasn't my fault. But the biggest side of things would have probably been not being able to get back at work, get a normal routine in life. I found myself twiddling my thumbs half the time, not knowing what to do, and that led into a breakdown into the relationship I was in at the time because I wasn't mentally strong enough. Eventually I started to break down mentally. I couldn't do anything for myself. Simple things like getting food, having a drink, changing clothes, I couldn't do without help. I felt like I was asking too much of my mum. She'd been there for me so much, I felt embarrassed to keep asking her for food, for drink. I want to change clothes, I want to get up and change DVD. It was just embarrassing to rely on her so much. I like being dependent and I couldn't. And that was when I started to break down mentally. I felt like everything was against me. I had nothing going for me. And I felt like, although people knew how bad it was for me, I don't think that they understood quite how bad it was. People would say, oh, how's your leg? But I couldn't go into enough detail to tell them just how bad it was, because I didn't want to be a sob story. I wanted to act like I was okay, but I really wasn't. As I was getting worse, I then was struggling to see the light. I had no routine. I wanted to get back to work. I couldn't. I spent all my savings. I had no money coming in. I felt like it was breaking down on my relationship. I couldn't do good things. Whenever I saw her, I was just down. And at that point, I sought psychological help and got diagnosed with PTSD. After my diagnosis, I had to go to doctors for depression. I was on several medication. Some started making me worse. Others I couldn't sleep properly on. And at that point I started to become suicidal. I had several attempts to take my life. One was on holiday with my mum and dad. I just felt like I was again. I wanted to take them out for a meal, but instead I was having to constantly rely on them for funding me for the whole holiday. I just thought I had no independence. I went up to a dual carriageway overpass, went to jump off. Luckily my dad was there to pull me back and stop that happening. Another time I was at home, I attached my belt to the curtain rail and the curtain rail snapped. And the final time, probably the most scary, was I screwed my belt to the ceiling. And that was the time where I come closest. I actually felt myself go a little, but then the screw head actually snapped and I fell to the floor. And at that point I was living at my mum and dad's. They come running up the stairs, they heard what had gone on, and they found me on the floor with the belt around my neck. And that to this day is probably one of the worst I've ever felt, because I felt like I hadn't just let myself down, I'd let my family down, and it wasn't down to what I'd done, it was the situation I've been put in through knife crime. After my attempts, I then got referred to the crisis team. I had daily visits where they'd come around my house, and I eventually started to get better. I got signed off the crisis team, and then a month later I had a relapse where I got taken back, and my mum actually had to take clothing in because they thought I was going to have to stay in the mental health ward overnight. It wasn't until one guy said that they'd come and check on me in the morning and then make their decision if I'd have to stay over or not. Seeing my mum pack a bag for me to potentially have to stay over at a mental health ward was one of the hardest things I think she's had to do. She could see what kind of place and what people were there that were obviously struggling as much as me, and reality is she didn't want her son in that situation. Obviously you think when somebody gets stabbed that it's just going to be the person that's stabbed and the stabbee that are affected, but it's not. My family, not just my close family, distant family, it affected everyone. All my friends, everyone that was out there on the night with me, all the friends that weren't there feel like they should have been there, and it just affected everyone to do with my side. When the incident happened, my mum and dad were actually on holiday, and they got phoned up and told your son's dead. So obviously for them to be a 3-hour plane journey away and get told their son hasn't made it, I dread to think what it's done to them, and I know that it's gone down as one of the worst moment of their life. Eventually when they found out I was right, they were straight to the airport, got back as soon as they could, and I can remember hearing their voices when I was in intensive care. I was getting treatment at the time, and they just said, just let us in, and just to see their faces when they saw I was okay is just amazing really, because they thought they'd lost me. I dread to think how they felt. The whole of my family is still impacted by the situation. There's not a day that goes by where probably any of us don't think about it. It was so hard for mum and dad to accept, even though obviously I was 22, grown up, should be doing it, because it was so bad. They didn't want me to ever go out again by the feel of it. Like, they kept saying, I had to keep saying to him, look, I'm just going out with some friends or anything. They'd have to say, are you sure you'll be all right? La, la, la. Give us a text. I'm 20. At the time, I was probably 24. And I was saying to him, look, you've got to not worry about this, but your parents can't help but worry. It's in the nature. Obviously, even though it was 4 years ago, things still get brought up to this day. And it still makes my mum cry. She's in tears over it. If someone was to bring it up, she can't help it. The memories, the bad memories of that time, always make her break down. And it made me feel guilty. It made me feel like it was my fault that I've upset my friends, my family. I couldn't get in my head that this isn't me, this is what's been done to me, but that's how you feel at the time. Not only it affected my friends and family, but I think it would have affected the person that stabbed me's family as well. I saw in court when he went down for 13 years for GBH with intent, 2 counts. His mum was in tears, his dad was in tears. It was pure disappointment on their behalf. But I could also see a little bit of remorse in him as he got taken away to be put in jail. He did, before the judge telling him to be gone, say, I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart. Whether that's something I can accept, I just don't know. After being in the high dependency ward, I moved into intensive care where I was on constant watch. I remember the police coming in to interview me about what happened that night, and at the time I didn't have a clue because obviously I passed out so quick. But they have a heart rate monitor on you in the hospital, and when it goes off it calls someone to come in, and I remember that my heart was going so bad that the machine wouldn't stop bleeping when the police were in there, because I was so nervous. I didn't have a clue what had gone on because I lost so much blood during the time. Luckily the police had seen CCTV and they were trying to calm me down and say, you are a victim, we're here to help you, try and calm down. The person that stabbed me was on the run when I was first in hospital. It wasn't for a few days that they phoned up and said, we've caught them. At that point I thought that it would be a straightforward, easy process. He gets sent to prison. I had 6 months of not knowing what was going to go on when I was going to court, and I still remember the day I got a text through saying that the guy had pleaded not guilty and the court date. And at that point my heart sunk. I was thinking, what goes on in court? What am I going to have to do? It was just more trauma for me to relive. When it eventually got to the court date, I got a phone call whilst on the way to court saying that he has now pleaded guilty, and it was just going to be a sentencing the next day. So at the sentencing I just had to read out my victim statement, and a video of the CCTV was shown, to which then the judge made his judgment of him having 13 years prison sentence for GBH on 2 counts. Before I went into court, they gave me the option to view the CCTV, and not only that, I viewed the body cam footage of the policeman that was on duty that night. To see yourself on the floor, just a red blob, was just words can't describe how bad it was. To myself, I would look like a ghost. I was white, just covered in blood, and I don't know how I've got away with it. You can hear in the background all of my friends trying to organise. There was people trying to film me with their phones. My friends were having to push them away. The paramedics were on me. They ripped off my trousers in the middle of the street, stuck his fist in the wound to stop it bleeding. So it was very, very intense. And the CCTV, if anything, because I didn't know what went on, certainly made me know that I was completely innocent. I was on my phone when it all started, and I literally just went to get the guy off my mate, and I've ended up worse off. The worst part about being a victim of knife crime for me had to be how deeply it affected my whole family and myself, knowing that I was completely innocent. Yeah, I can't reverse what's happened. I still feel guilty, and I know I shouldn't. Since being stabbed, I've realised that it's not just in films, it's not just on the news. It happens in your own streets, it happens in Rushden. I was a victim, and it just proves it can happen to anyone. I'm ashamed that I feel part of being in knife crime. I don't like being tarred with the same brush as it. I'm ashamed to tell people that I was stabbed, and it's something I don't like being brought up. Now, 4 years on from the incident, I'm mentally a lot better than I was. Things have started to look up. I've managed to get back to work. I'm full-time now. I'm trying to find myself distracted from them days, but there isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about it, and I can't see when there will be a day where I don't think about it. It's just something I deal with now. Having my leg, what still isn't 100%, which still affects my ability in sports, how I work, and in everyday life, it is a constant reminder of being stabbed, and it's something again that I just hope one day I can get back to where I was. Days go by where I do wonder where my life would be now if I hadn't been stabbed. The sentence that I've received from being a stabbing victim is far worse than any prison sentence he could have got. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about the incident. The consequences of being stabbed will last a lot longer than any prison sentence will for him. There's not a day that goes by where I don't think about it, and it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. Although 13 years will never be enough, I know that he has missed out on his 20s, which in my eyes is the prime of anyone's years, where you can have some of your best times. I know I certainly have. Even though I've experienced some awful times, I have still had great holidays, great times with friends, and just things that you won't be able to experience from inside a cell. If I could speak to the guy that did stab me, I'd have to ask him, first of all, why? Why did you do this? Also, do you know how many people you've affected? It's not just yourself sitting in prison. It's my family, it's my friends, and it's your family. My message to people that carry knives would simply be, don't do it. There's no excuse. No one needs them for protection. No one needs them to carry them because others do. No one needs to carry them because I feel safer with a knife. If you feel like you're having trouble, speak to someone. The best thing you can do as well, if you know someone that does carry a knife and you're smart enough not to, try and encourage them not to. There is no reason at all to carry knives. The only thing you'll do is end up ruining your life, others, and your families. Save lives, no knives.